Church. It's great to be with you again as we close out finally our series on the Kingdom of God. I'm so excited. Let's pray. God, I pray that these lessons that you've been teaching us as we look for this theme in your text would stay with us, Lord, that the things that we've meditated on and discussed in community together, that they would continue to do work in us, Lord, that your Spirit would bring them back when we need to remember them, and that you would equally be with us in this last teaching that we have together, this last verse that we have on the Kingdom of God, that you would be with us, be with me as I teach, that the things that I say might be good and helpful and true, and be with all of the listeners wherever they might be found. I pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, so what have we been doing? We've been talking about if the gospel is that the kingdom of God is at hand. What does that actually mean? What is the kingdom? So we started out by looking at the beginning of Jesus's ministry when he defined it, and he used Isaiah 61 and started walking it out by healing people, delivering people, setting people free. And we looked at that. Then we looked at the Sermon on the Mount, which told us about how we can participate in that kingdom, how we can engage in that kingdom in our daily life and what that looks like. And then we've looked at just a couple little stories or little parables that Jesus has been telling about the kingdom when he was teaching his disciples before he was killed. And so we have one more of those. It's not a parable. And for context, this is part of the farewell discourse. This is one of the things that Jesus is sharing with his disciples before he's killed. So this is after the Lord's Supper section. This is before he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. It's nestled right in there. And he has some super interesting things to say about kingdom. And we're going to look at them together. I'll read it. Luke chapter 22, I believe, verse 28 through 30. And a dispute also occurred among them as to which of them, this being the disciples gathered at this Passover dinner, was recognized as being greatest. So he said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors, ugertes. But you are not to be like this, but the one who is greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the one who leads like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? Yet I am in your midst as the one who serves. And you are the ones who have remained with me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred on me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on seats judging the 12 tribes of Israel." Okay, so we're going to walk through this text one piece at a time, right? So the first thing we see, they're gathered for this Pesach dinner, this probably Seder dinner, though it looks different than the ones that are practiced now. And it says that a dispute also occurred among them as to which one of them was recognized as being the greatest. The things that had just happened is Jesus had just said one of them was going to betray him. And so it's kind of a natural outflowing of that conversation, trying to figure out who's the weakest link, right? It quickly comes to who's the biggest in the hierarchy. We love to look down on the disciples for how can you possibly be squabbling about anything, much less anything as silly as this right before, you lose Jesus. Seems so petty to us as armchair observers, and yet, first off, it's very important in communal culture. We've talked about before how there are these different rankings of honor, of how much acquired honor you've earned, and it's very important that everybody knows where they stand in that process, and it's a big part of their culture. And secondly, we still do this all the time. We rank ourselves all the time, maybe not explicitly, but constantly, right? And so many of our conversations, well, I XYZ, well, I ABC. And in our culture, it has a lot more to do with the ways that we dress or where we work or how much money we make, right? We have all these different metrics, depending on your subculture, right, of what determines your rank. And so let's not hold ourselves too high above these disciples who are probably teenagers, right? And instead see ourselves in them and empathize with them, and then hopefully be able to learn something from them. All right, so what does he say? He enters into this space, and he of course could have just told all of them to stop it and pull themselves together, which would have been very valid, right? He had some things to teach and they're distracted, which is the big thing about ego, right? It's not just that like pride is bad and we should feel bad and not be thinking about rank. It's that it's distracting from something that's really important. Being self-involved and constantly thinking about what other people think of us takes away from being able to be present and being engaged in what we're being called to and what beautiful things are around us in every moment. Okay, so how does Jesus respond? He says this, which seems weird to us, probably. He says, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors, urgetes. But you are not to be like this. So what on earth is he talking about? The kings of the Gentiles, or the kings of the nations, and benefactors and urgetes. So this, hopefully, after the amount of teaching we've done on patronage, reminds us of this patronage system that was a huge part of their world. When we hear benefactor, ding, 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 that should make us think, oh, right, patronage system. However, contrasted to all the times that Jesus has said that God is a good patron, here he's talking about earthly patrons and those who lord it over other people, and luxuriate in their authority that they have over them, others. And he calls them specifically urgetes. And that's our key to potentially know a little bit more what's going on here. So it's potentially true that Jesus was referencing this famous king from the line of the Ptolemies. So if you're not familiar with the Ptolemies, they're a dynasty of Egypt that Cleopatra was famously part of, really big historical family that ruled the kingdom of Egypt for a very, very long time, and the Greeks were jealous of them at all these different points. But Ptolemy the third, but also the eighth, more likely the eighth, because he was much more of a contemporary of Jesus and died, a generation or so before Jesus, and therefore was much more of a cultural touchstone. He called himself the urgetes, so he called himself the benefactor. But the thing was, both Ptolemy the Eighth's contemporaries and modern historians render him as incredibly cruel and brutal leader. He killed all of his political enemies and lit a gymnasium, so a university, on fire and left all the students in there to die, right? So calling himself this big benefactor, big patron, someone who's really there to help others, and yet it's all about the self, all about using that power to try to gain more, right? A worldview of not enough. So Jesus, first off, is obviously calling out the hypocrisy of this kind of leadership, calling yourself a benefactor, someone who's looking out to be able to bless and serve others, when in fact, you're only looking out for yourself. He's also cutting off at the very sprout, as would blossom later throughout Christian history, but he's cutting off at the very ground this phenomenon, which is present today in evangelicalism, but has been present, like I said, all through Christian history, of a kind of Christian nationalism, right? Before we had nation states, it was more championing Christendom. But it's this worldview that we need to be shrewd. Jesus said we can be shrewd. And so we need to take the created order of the world and try to be as successful as possible and gain the most power possible in the world system, to have a hold on things strategically. So it's not about being able as an individual to find your own calling and say that maybe it involves participating in local government, right? That's completely valid. It's saying we need to make sure we have our people in the local and judicial system and the federal system. We need to make sure that our team has the most power and has the ability to shape whatever nation we're in. Jesus is saying, no, thank you. This is not the way, right? He could have been born as the governor of Judea. He could have been born as one of the Caesars and had a huge reach if Jesus had cared most about that, right? He could have been born again as an emperor who could have spread the gospel and healed millions of people all over the Roman Empire, or, you know, the head of one of the Chinese dynasties or something else equally epic, right? He could have done any of those things, but instead he chose to be born a blue-collar laborer and a rural backwater former military outpost, right? Off in the north. This is who our God is. We do have stories in Tanakh of people like Joseph or Esther, using their opportunity and using the doors that God opened to them to be able to bless lots of people all at once. Esther saved all of her people. Joseph saved the Egyptians and his people from the famine through the opportunity and power that was handed to him. But we don't see a continual seeking out of God's people striving to rise to the top of a local political system. Abraham did not roll into town and look around at the other city-states and say, I'm going to be the biggest city-state leader. No, he remained a nomad, right? He declined political power, even though he had an abundance of wealth and resources. That wasn't something that he was interested in, because his calling was to bless all nations, to serve all peoples, right? And that's the same legacy that we're folded into. So Christians ought to be the experts in the world at being good counselors, at being good helpers, at being good servants, at being good people who are off to the side, but have incredibly loving and helpful things to say to people who would like us to help, right? Like you as a person to help. And any worldview which champions us grabbing onto whatever power we possibly can and building our own empire and building our own Tower of Babel and our fortress and locking ourselves in there, that's not walking in the way of Jesus. This is not what he invites us to. The greatest among you must become like the youngest, Luke 22 says. The person with the least honor in their system, the person with the least experience, the person who has the least power. Serving, he is the one who serves. And so we're invited to follow in that. Jesus is also able to walk in this servant mindset and role because of how he is rooted in his identity. Some of us grew up in the church, especially if we're women, really shoved into the corner of like, you were made to be a servant and have a servant's heart and just be quiet and do what you are told to in order to sustain this great work that presumably the men are off doing, right? Maybe with some lip service to men being servant leaders as well. Hopefully at least there was lip service. But Jesus is able to walk in that calling because his identity is not rooted in what other people think of him, in his status, in his uniqueness, in his knowledge or security or strength. That's not who Jesus was, and that's also not what really defines us. So when we can be rooted in who we are, the beautiful and true identity that God does, that God says over us, and we can also be rooted in what we do, right? James is there to say faith without works is dead, and so it's not about knowing the right things, it's about doing things. So when we're rooted in our identity and our eyes are set on the things that we've been given to do, it becomes so much easier to operate as a servant, right? Because we're not doing it hoping that other people notice. We're not doing it hoping that others will perceive us as being so XYZ. We're not doing it to tap out because everything's kind of overwhelming anyway. We're doing it because it's our joy to do, something that is actually life-giving for us to do. And it's out of this deep confidence of, I know who I am. I know that I am loved by God. I know that I am part of the household of God and I have everything that I need. And that enabled Jesus to operate in a healthy way. And my hope for us is that we can have the same presence in the world, because an angsty servanthood is not a blessing to other people, right? This whole story of Martha and Mary, someone who's like, I'm gonna do the thing, but I hope you know how much I resent you for not helping out, right? That's not a blessing to all people, and we need to be realistic about that. So we need to take care of our own health as we serve, or maybe even before we serve. Okay, so how do we serve is the question. How do we serve as a community? It's also just always good to have a little addendum that reminds us that all vocations are sacred. I happen to serve, even in my role as a leader, just by teaching and using the education that I have been able to acquire in order to bless other people, right? That's what it happens to look like for me. But again, when so many of us grew up with different messages overhead, your service does not have to look like evangelism. Your service does not need to look like volunteering at church. Your service does not have to look like becoming a missionary or a church planter or a volunteer. Your service also doesn't necessarily need to look like doing roadside cleanup, right? whatever wonderful things the city is doing, of course, we are invited to participate in that, and that can be a beautiful image when we do that. Same with evangelizing or volunteering at church. However, that's not the peak of human fulfillment, is not that kind of service, right? It's not that we always need to be doing more, because Jesus served and so did we. Whatever your vocation is that God has given you, it is already holy, right? So some of us serve our communities through providing health care, or by providing childcare, or by teaching yoga, or by providing energy infrastructure, or working in the hospitality industry. All of these things are beautiful and holy and sacred, and that is already your service to all peoples. And so please don't hear when we say that, we're supposed to be servant leaders, or that Jesus served and so did we. That doesn't mean go and sign up for some project to do on top of your already crazy schedule, that you can feel like, hey, check the box. That's not the goal. The goal is to take this servant posture, rooted and grounded in love and fulfillment and security in ourselves, and bring that presence into wherever we might be working, whether that's in the home or outside the home, right? Important little note. It's not about having the right things in order. It's about, and whether that's right beliefs or right anything else, it's about bringing that presence of God's love and using that to serve wherever we are. Jesus has more stuff to say, so let's look at it. He says, "You are the ones who have remained with me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom just as my Father conferred on me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on seats judging the 12 tribes of Israel." Okay, we're going to start with the last part first because it's the weirdest. You will sit on seats judging the 12 tribes of Israel. There's been a lot of pretty sketchy interpretation around that. There's also a lot of silence, like if you look at a bunch of commentaries like I did this week, lots of people just skip right over it. We've got great stuff about servant leadership, then we have the start of the crucifixion narrative, and so who really needs to look at this first, right? But the stuff that is there is interesting because sit on seats judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Is this pre-death or is this post-death? Which reality are we talking about? Is this to all the disciples or is it to all Christians? There's some questions here and I don't have all the answers, but we're going to talk about what those options are. So most of the historical Christian commentary says super anti-Semitic things about how the disciples are going to become the apostles, who will then condemn the Jewish community for denying Jesus, which, by the way, isn't what happened because he had thousands of followers, but whatever. It's also terrible, just as is, but that's what they do with it. There's also commentary or interpretation that says the 12 tribes just really means the church secretly. I don't know why Jesus wouldn't say that, but whatever. And so they'll be the judges of the church. Okay, less problematic, but I don't quite see that personally, because Jesus could have said that. He said it earlier to Peter, right? Whatever. And he'll say it later to Peter again. The third take is that it's about post-death rather than pre-death, right? And so the idea is that now in this life, you get to be a servant and be humble, but that's really all just a sham because you're just grinding your teeth and clenching your fists and knowing that someday you'll get everything you deserve and it'll include a crown and a giant throne and you'll judge everybody. Right? That also seems weird. The just hold out now, this life doesn't really mean anything anyway. It's just to grit your teeth and bear it, and someday you'll be honored finally and people will appreciate you. I have trouble imagining that all of the hierarchy that God has warned us against since the very beginning of his story, right? He was not excited about God's people having kings. He was not excited about this different hierarchy that was forming. So if he's been so against this the whole time, why would it suddenly get instituted when the world is finally healed and put back together again, right? Doesn't totally track. So what is going on here? You will sit on seats judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So there's all sorts of links to different passages that we're not going to get into, but if you want to go on a exciting Bible adventure, I'd give you Genesis, where we're told to rule, right? Creation mandate. Daniel, where there's a prophecy that God's people will rule. 1 Corinthians 6, which says that we'll judge angels, which is pretty wild if you ask me. Don't tend to hear sermons on that one. And then to Revelation, which portrays those who have been murdered as elevated into seats of authority as they're judging the ones who murdered them. Very, very interesting justice dynamics that happen in Revelation. So I'd posit just one thing in all of that for us to focus on, even though I am confident in saying that I don't know for sure. The word for judging there, including in the Greek, is not the judicial judgment. It's not the big fancy wig in the UK. It's not an angry, distant king sitting on a throne overlooking everybody. We've talked about this in our sermons on judgment, right? So you can go back in the YouTube playlist and find that one. But the judgment in God's world and in the history and culture of the text is not a legislative one, not a condemnatory one. It's about discernment and restoration and relationship in service to the community, right? These figures, that was the role. And so whatever the disciples, and maybe us, are being invited to in this particular promise from Jesus, has more to do with being people who are discerning and restorative and relational and serving their community than it does sitting back, on scary thrones and telling people they're guilty or innocent. So that's where I'll leave that. We can talk more about what it means together if you come to discussion online in the evenings. I'd love to hear what you make of it. Okay, so back to the rest of this passage. So he says, "You're the ones who have remained with me in my trials," or rest of this verse, "and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred on me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom." Okay, so first, what is important to Jesus is relationship with us as a person, right? He asks us to remain with him. So we did a couple of sermons on soul hospitality last year as our summer series. And we talked about how Jesus desires life with us. And here he says, the ones who've remained with me, right? So whatever happens, whatever beliefs we've wrestled with, whatever our church abusive experiences, the invitation from God is to remain with him relationally. It's beautiful. But that's not the end of what he says. He says, "I confer on you," for those who have remained with me, by the way. So those aren't like, oh, I checked the box ages ago. I said yes to following Jesus, and that's the end of that. Now I get to do this. Nope, they're simultaneous. For those who remain with me, I confer on you. Okay, so we've got to stay in that abiding in relationship with Jesus. Okay, so I confer on you a kingdom. So the kingdom is now our responsibility, right? It's on us. It's been conferred onto us. And we've been talking about how easy it is to cop out of our responsibility via our theology. God's sovereign. God knows what he's doing. God doesn't need me. I'm just a little human. God's got it. Don't worry about it. Take things day by day. Let go and let God. Some of those things are wonderfully, of course, true. In fact, I'd probably say all of them are wonderfully true. We aren't supposed to worry. God does have things in order. And yet, though he is trustworthy, though he is a good parent, though he is a good patron, he's still given us things to do. And this is not a sit back and let it ride until the rapture steals us all into the abyss. It's the news for us is that the kingdom of God has been conferred to us. It's totally wild, but we've heard the kingdom of God is within you. We've heard all this stuff about what the kingdom of God is. But Jesus, as he's leaving, or at least as he's going to go be murdered, he says that it's been conferred upon us. So some of us have the Enneagram, right? Our personalities are like, yeah, let's go. We got this. Woo! We already feel significant. We love a challenge. We love a big vision and mission. And for some of us, it's a challenge to imagine that our being in our life is essential to God's story. But that's what he's been saying this whole time. We've been appointed as administrators of this kingdom. And so we've got to, in community, remind ourselves of what that kingdom is, and what it's about and what the mission is. And we'll do that in just a moment. The last thing in this section is, he's before the weird part about sitting on seats and judging, is it says, you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. Okay, this eating and drinking at a table is a motif that goes all the way through the Bible. God lets his presence be seen by the full 70 elders of Israel, so all the old people who would form the Sanhedrin later. But with Moshe and Torah, God reveals his presence to all of them. We like to have this idea that only Moshe got to see him. Well, no, Hagar got to see God. 70 people at a big party got to see God. And the context that they got to see God in was sitting at this table and having a feast together. Because abundance, celebration, community, rest, generosity, all are the themes of God. And so that's why in the Psalms, we hear about how we're invited to eat at God's table, even in the presence of our enemies, i.e., even though we're still in this world and it hasn't been healed yet and there's still problems and our enemies might be right there, we're still invited to community and rest and abundance and generosity and being in God's presence at this table. And some of us, by the way, we're taught to believe that God's character is that he'll only give you your little rations, only give you just enough, only give you exactly what you need before keeling over. God is not a scary matron at an orphanage. He's a good parent who loves to bless his kids. And we've got to work on why we tend to hold those ideas about God's character and start questioning them and holding them up against the text. All right. We see this thing about table and eating and drinking feast in the teachings of Jesus. There's lots of passages and parables that we didn't cover about how God is throwing a big feast and whether or not people choose to come to that feast. We see it in Revelation, that the new earth is like a wedding party, that all the peoples of the earth, all the nations, all the ethnicities, all the cultures are invited to and are present at, in fact. Communion is another one of those pictures. We're invited to the table of God. We're invited to be in the presence of God and partake together, remembering the life and death of Jesus. Okay, so that picture goes all the way through. So this is what we're being invited to. Resting, community and joy and celebration and abundance and generosity for our body, our embodied self and our spirit, right? And also to govern well, or to be administrators, is better than govern, of this kingdom that has been conferred on us, both individually and corporately. So I'm going to read a translation of Isaiah 61 that Jesus opened up this whole series on when he said that the kingdom of God is at hand. This is what he preached from. So I'm going to read it again. The Spirit of the Lord Yahweh is upon us, or me, because Yahweh anointed me to bring good news to the downcast. He has sent me to wrap up the brokenhearted, to call to the captives liberty to run quickly, to those who are bound the opening of power, to call the year of the pleasure of Yahweh and the day of the vengeance of. So that's the part that Jesus cut out. To comfort those that mourn, to place for the mourners of Zion, to give them a gleaming crown instead of ashes, oil of leaping gladness instead of mourning, a cloak of praise instead of a spirit of dullness, a strong tree of justice planted by Yahweh to cause beauty, to rebuild the ancient ruins, to raise up the desolate first places, to make new the desolate cities for eras and eras. Strangers will stand and shepherd your flocks. Sons of immigrants will be your farmers and vine dressers. You will be priests of Yahweh. They will call you those who wait upon our God. They will say to you, of the force of the nations you shall eat, and of their glory you will exchange. Instead of shame, a double portion. Instead of disgrace, shouting for joy over your portion in their land. Permanent joy will be for them. For I, Yahweh, love just judgment. I hate robbery rising up. I give wages steadfastly. I cut a permanent covenant for them. Their descendants will be known in the nations. That which comes from them will be known among the peoples. All that see them will recognize that they are descendants that Yahweh kneels with. Surely, truly, I will leap for joy in Yahweh. My soul spins for joy in my God, for he has dressed me in garments of deliverance and wrapped me in a cloak of justice. As a groom undertakes a crown and a bride adorns herself with jewels, as the earth brings forth growth and the garden grows her seeds, so the Lord Yahweh will grow justice and praise parallel to all the nations. This is kingdom. This is what God is doing, and this is what has been conferred upon us. We need help, and so I'll pray. God, I thank you that what you're inviting us to is beautiful, that it's about joy instead of shame, and honor and love instead of condemnation. It's about peace. It's about freedom. It's about coming into a wide open space. I pray that we would be people who are profoundly changed by the vision that you have for us, that we would be rooted and grounded in who you made us to be, in such a place of health that we are able to adopt the posture and the presence of service in a joyful way, in an empowered way. I pray that you would be with us as we are conformed to looking more like you in that sense, whatever dimension or sphere you have placed us within to serve. I thank you that they are all good, and that none is better than another. I thank you that you invite us to your table always, and that we can be with you even when our enemies are around us, even when the world is falling apart, we can still find solace with you. I pray that we would be people who remain with you no matter what. I ask all these things in thankfulness for what you have done over the past school year, and pray that you would be with us this summer. I ask all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day. If you have never given before, there's a link at refugepullman.com that says give on it. If this space has been a blessing to you or a service to you in any way, we would be profoundly helped and blessed by your gift, whether that's a one-time or a recurring gift. We'd also love your voice and your presence. So please, if it would be a further blessing to you, come on and join us online on Zoom. We'd love to see your face and hear what you have to say. And if you're in the area, we would definitely love to have you at church, right? So all that being said, thanks for a wonderful sermon series, at least from my end of things. Have a good one.